I just had my last viola lesson with David Harding for now, for the time that I'm living in Pittsburgh, at least. I just came across this tree. We had a severe thunderstorm yesterday. I saw a car that got crushed by a thing, like a branch. That's what they call those. That's Kathy. And it looks like another storm's a brewing. I wanted to do a little video where I just got to talk about the stuff that I've done while living in Pittsburgh. And it's very strange because I've not yapped in front of the camera in quite a bit. It's been like two years at least. I don't know. It's hard for me to find a good way of speaking that feels normal and genuine, so I'm making more of an effort to be a little more normal. I'm mostly making this for myself. However, there are quite a few projects that I've not shared, really. I wanted to just go through and talk about the stuff that I've done in the last 3 years, and just share what my experience was doing grad school, and then kind of transitioning my education a little bit from composing to conducting a little bit more. And actually, while I do this, I'm gonna find a different spot down in that other place. You know the one. This is really something to behold. I'll start by saying that I have loved living here. Pennsylvania is actually my home state, or like my birth state. I only lived here for like 5 years as a kid, but being in a space with really large trees is very nice, and the green is a little bit greener than it is in the west. Through these trees is Phipps Conservatory, and that is actually the largest building in the world. Here's some more wreckage. Panther Hollow is where I'm going. This thing is full of panthers. The first thing that I did when I moved here in August of 2022 was plan and start scripting and making a bunch of videos for YouTube, like within the first week that I was here. And I had a lot of energy for it for some reason. I had taken a few months off of making any kind of video, and so I was like, you know what, since I have the energy for it, I'm just gonna make a million videos that I've had ideas for a while, and just churn them out, and hopefully something sticks. And nothing really did. There were a couple things that got a good amount of views, and like random shorts that I made will still, like, there's something right now that's getting a lot of, what is a fugue video, it's getting randomly, suddenly, after 2 years, a lot of views. But I made a million videos that didn't start releasing until December, so I had spent like 4 months kind of in the planning and preparation phase for that. And I think there's probably something about having made all of those at the exact same time that made it feel like I was sort of churning them out like a factory. And maybe that's not what we want. Then after that, I really burnt out, and that's why you've not really seen any, if you've been subscribed for a while, you've not seen any videos other than videos that are just my music. There was a bug. There's a bridge that one time for a class, I had to pretend like I was a horse and bang rocks together as part of a piece that somebody wrote, a site-specific composition for this bridge in Panther Hollow. Haven't seen any panthers yet. Composition-wise, I started my 4th string quartet, and this is one of those projects that really just never saw the light of day. There was a reading of a movement, and that was as far as that went. I did have an idea my first semester at Carnegie Mellon to basically have 4 different string quartets, like 4 different groups of people on a recital together, and each one of them would play one of my quartets. And I still think that's a cool idea, but I did not really connect with anybody for like most of that first year in a way that like empowered me to feel comfortable with like asking somebody to do a project like that. And my collaborations were really weird that first semester. The feeling was always really strange, and I think a lot of that had to do with me I was getting a master's in composition, so I was not doing viola. I was playing a little tiny bit, but not in lessons, not in viola studio, not in orchestra. And I think that had a huge impact on probably the way that I was perceived, but also probably mostly how I saw myself. And like, I felt very much like an outsider from the instrumentalists. And so that was really, really difficult. And I realized how good I had it in undergrad being a double major. And even that was sort of a late addition. I wasn't a double major the whole time, but I was in viola studio the whole time, and I was in orchestra the whole time. And that was so much easier to have community in than a group of composers that meets once a week. There wasn't really a forum to like consistently connect with performers. And I really think sometimes the only way to do that is by performing yourself. Funny enough, I did make a video about that at that time, and it's so weird. Some of the things that I talked about in those videos are like, they were like things that I needed to hear at that time, but I didn't even process that or like listen to myself. I don't know what that is. I also streamed on Twitch a lot. For probably most of that first semester, I was streaming almost every day, and who could have predicted the burnout that would lead to? Who could have predicted that? I don't know. But back to the composing, that fourth string quartet was sort of the wrapping up of the previous three quartets, and I did not see it before that as like any kind of arc, or they weren't like intended to be grouped together necessarily, but I wrote the fourth one to like make that a thing, to sort of put a closing on that group of pieces, which I think worked pretty well. Hard to say because I haven't like obviously heard them all one after the other, but that's kind of what that piece was. That was the only thing I think I wrote that semester because I had spent so long not really actively being a composer in the previous year. I was in my gap year, and I've already spoken about this, but I was not writing a lot at that time. I also didn't play viola in my gap year the entire year. And my classes were cool, but still just like kind of, I don't know, just weird socially. I don't know, grad school felt very different. Maybe some of that is like being in a school post-COVID. That first semester, I took a class called The Symphonies of Mahler, which was awesome. I took a class called History of Black American Music, which was awesome. I took a research methods class that you just take when you're in grad school. There's a helicopter somewhere. And I took a recording class as well. And now I'm trying to decide if I should go onto Ponticulus Trail. I've never been here, so I think I should, probably. And actually, the most significant features of that first semester for me were that I ran a mile every morning for the whole first semester, and I didn't drink alcohol. And that was great. That was really good for everything. This is cool because it has some bridges that let water through. And there's a person back there. So I think most of my first semester was defined by very strange and pretty lonely social vibes, but also really like weirdly good mental health because of those things I just mentioned in the face of that. And I liked my classes, and I don't know. It was exciting to live in a new city that I had only been to once before moving here. And I loved where I lived too. Not my apartment, but the neighborhood. My apartment was really something to behold. My parents called it Grandma's Attic. At the end of that semester, I was also starting to work on the Dad Village Symphony Orchestra, which that was Fabled, which is the most recent project we've done. You may notice that we've not done a project since then. And that was at the end of the semester, started to work on that, and we had the recordings in. And then over the winter break, I did the bulk of the editing. And Ernesto and Grace helped a lot with the editing, which was really awesome. And of course, Jonathan did the mastering and all of that. And they were all super, super helpful. But every time, it's so stressful. And I especially felt that, like, being not near my family anymore and going home to spend time with them, which had all of a sudden become very limited, and I'm spending that time editing stuff, like, I don't know. And in the Thanksgiving break, I was spending it doing homework, and I was like, this is just stupid. This is very muddy right here. That's the mud. So these are my shoes that my cousins got me. They say Dadville on the back. But yeah, I don't know. I think I just it helped me cement for myself what was important in life, which sounds super cheesy, whatever. But it's true. It was really like, oh my gosh, I only get to see my parents once every several weeks, couple months, and I'm spending it, doing research methods homework. It's just nonsense. I'm spending very limited and valuable time with people that I love and not using it well. I will say, though, that it was a great project and I felt the best about it. And I think that was every DVSO thing we did, I felt better and better about the way it sounded and the way it was presented. And usually in those previous premieres, there was like a sort of numbness I would have because I just listened to that thing 1,000 times for the last couple months. But for Fabled, I was able to really enjoy it, and that was really cool. And it felt nice. And we just put that out on Spotify finally. I dropped the ball on that a little bit, but you can go listen to that if you want. So into that second semester, composing-wise, I'm working on, this is spring of 2023, a commission from the Colorado Music Festival led by Peter Ungen, and I am writing the opener for a concert that is celebrating their 125th anniversary. And Colorado Music Festival takes place in the foothills at like the base of the Flatirons, which are a mountain range in Boulder that have a very distinct shape and look to them. And I named the piece Flatiron Escapades, and it's an opener, but it was inspired by the previous several years I spent living like right there, literally in that neighborhood where that music festival happens. I lived for 3 years of my undergrad, and that was awesome to write. And then that summer they performed it in July alongside Carter Pan's Dreams I Must Not Speak, which was an awesome piece, and Adolphus Hailstork's JFK, The Last Speech. All of those were premieres, and that was like one of the most special things I've been part of. Certainly my biggest, orchestra premiere. Yeah, that was super cool, super great to work with Peter, but also to like share that program with two composers who I admire so much. That was really, really great. So that was what I was working on for most of the spring semester. But then I also wrote a solo English horn piece because I went to Berlin for a week, and I would sit down and I'd be like, okay, I had my like staff paper. I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna write this movement before I stand up. So they're kind of like miniature movements, obviously. So that piece is called Postkarten aus Berlin. Again, solo English horn piece. Grace Stringfellow performed it. It was written for her. She performed it on her master's recital a little over a year ago. And that was a very cold place. I went in early March, and it was cold. And I really feel that we could learn from this. They wear their history on their sleeve. It is just all out on display. And so that in combination with just how goddamn cold it was a harrowing place to be, and amazing to see just all of it. I mean, there's so much that happened in the last 100 years that is just like insane to stand in the presence of. So I had to write something. I knew that for sure. Also that semester I started studying conducting with Daniel Nesta Curtis, who is the director of, well, I don't want to get the titles wrong. He conducts Nat 28. I don't know what kind of director he is. I'm just learning about all this stuff right now. But he conducts Nat 28, which is the eminent new music ensemble in Pittsburgh. I did wind up writing for their call for scores and being one of the winners, which was really cool. So I had a premiere from them as well. A piece for Perot Ensemble called Shady Side Loops. That premiered a little over a year ago as well. I have a bug on me. But anyway, I started studying conducting with him, and that really turned around my attitude of being here. I really enjoyed studying with him and studying conducting again. I hadn't studied conducting since my junior year of college, and so that was nice to reconnect with, because I felt that I was really just getting a lot out of that, and so that really transformed my whole experience. I conducted the repertoire orchestra, which is basically like a reading orchestra for the conductors and also for the players to just read through standard rep. So I conducted Haydn 104th Symphony and a movement of Scheherazade, which is not a piece that I had like I knew it, obviously, like I had known of it and listened to it, but I didn't really know it. So that was cool to sink my teeth into. That summer, I had the premiere with the Colorado Music Festival, and I also recorded my flute pieces, which you may have seen that recently. The videos to those are not ready, but the album is out. All of the audio is done. 2 flute sonatas and my prelude for alto flute, performed by Madison Hardick and Anastasia Pavlenko, who were wonderful to work with and just wonderful performers. So that was great. I spent a lot of time with them that summer. I'm beginning to fear that I don't know how to get back to my car, which is fine because this is really lovely. But that's just on my mind. But yeah, I spent pretty much all that summer in Colorado and then moved into the place that I'm moving out of right now with Claire Gunsbury, who's a flutist who I went to undergrad with, and she also went to Carnegie Mellon for her master's, and we've collaborated quite a bit. And by the way, the whole year before that, I was living by myself, so that was, I think, helpful to my social situation, I guess, or my social fulfillment. But even still, coming back was difficult, especially getting towards winter. It was just really, really tough. But I continued studying conducting. Oh, it's the horse bridge. Huh. Am I back where I think I am? This was actually very easy. I'm under the horse bridge now. This is where I had to pretend to be a horse. I would really like to write a piece about my time here and my experience, I guess, but also just the city. It's a great city. I think the piece would bear the same title as this video. It's a great place. It's a really great place. And I will be back here. I have to remember that. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should have gone into this video with more of a plan, but my energy to talk about myself is diminishing. It feels increasingly like I'm just listing things that happened, which is not really what I wanted this to be, but maybe a little bit is fine. I'm at a gas station in western Kentucky, and it looks like I'm living through something extreme right now, but I'm not. It just appears very interesting on the camera. And before I got here, I was listening to Mahler's Second Symphony kind of out of order. I started with the second movement and listened through to the end, and then listened to the first movement of a different recording. So that was interesting, but it reminded me of my symphony that I started before I moved to Pittsburgh and that I worked on well in Pittsburgh. But in the entire 3 years I was there, I never managed to finish it. And So that's something on the horizon too, is like trying to get back into that piece and figure out what needs to be done with it and try to get back into that headspace. But it is really weird to have a piece that I started before I moved there and will be finished after I moved away from there. Very strange. I learned a lot from Mahler in the last 4 years or so, and probably even longer than that, but especially in the last 4 years, it's been like a real addiction. And I guess I've had phases of that before, but I've started to like really properly study it instead of just like listening obsessively. Gotten to like really dissect some scores, especially the Fourth Symphony, which is a real gem. But that's something that I really look forward to continue doing, is score studying Mahler, learning more from Mahler. I think the last 3 years being in Pittsburgh and starting to lean more in conducting have brought me to a place where I'm more like readily able to study repertoire and know how to do score study and know how to learn from pieces. And that's been really cool. That's something that I started to develop, I think, at the beginning of 2023, and it's just continually evolved even through this last year, because every piece needs something different. But yeah, I was just thinking about that because I was listening to Mahler, and other than that, I've just been listening to Scott the Woz videos for like 10 hours. Not quite 10 hours. Something like that, though. The last thing I'll say in this little gas station bit here is that I've been thinking a lot more about how I want to talk about the 2023 to 24 year, because it was very difficult, and I haven't been eager to film any of it because I don't want to like be super negative, or frame it in a way that maybe over-represents the negative. And so I have just been remembering all of the projects and all the positive things, and so I am going to try and focus on it through that lens a little bit more than the personal life stuff. I'm now not in Western Kentucky. I'm now weeding, and it's November. So it's 6 months later. I wanted to do the rest of this in June, not in November, but that's fine. Throughout this summer, I spent most of my time traveling around Colorado, especially in the mountains, and so I was always thinking, you know, like that would be a great place to film the rest of this, just because it's quite pretty. And that did not come to pass because I was busy with other stuff, mostly family stuff, and then trying to find a place to live. Yeah, so I'm supposed to talk about 2023 to 2024, and I promised, well, I didn't promise anything, but I said at the gas station in Kentucky that I was not going to focus negatively on that particular year. And I think I'm actually now in a space where it's easier for me to fulfill that and think about it a little more positively. I also said earlier in the video, it felt like I was just listing things that happened, which is kind of what, you know, that's kind of what this is. And I think that's actually okay, because I do like to think about things kind of through lists. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like when I think about what I want to share about 2023 to 2024, I think about the pieces that I wrote, or maybe the classes I took, which I am not going to do because those were less good. At least a couple of them were less good. I'm particularly thinking about an electronic music class I took that was just like extremely nothing, but that's fine. But just speaking in terms of the music I wrote, I was wrapping up my Rhapsody for flute and chamber orchestra, written for Claire Gunsbury, whom I lived with at the time, and the Carnegie Mellon Philharmonic conducted by Daniel Curtis. And that was really fun and like actually collaborative. I feel like often, I mean, I don't know what other people's experiences are, but I can speak for myself in that, like, when it comes to collaborating with a performer, somebody approaches you and says, for example, I would love it if you wrote a clarinet piece. We'll use that as an example because that also happened in this year. So that particular instance, I wrote a clarinet sonata, and that was for my very good friend Anushka Divakar for her one of her doctoral recitals at IU. Writing that piece was not collaborative, definitively, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is usually how I do things when I write music for people, unless it's a situation where it's like, you know, how high can you play on the clarinet without it sounding strained, because that's going to vary from person to person. That's sort of the most that we ever really interfaced about the piece. Okay, so I'm editing this, and I hate the way that I've presented this conversation. What I'm meaning to say here is that the process of like actively composing the piece is not collaborative. There is obviously a very other important element that goes into working with a performer, which is the performance, and that is where the collaboration takes place in every instance of working with somebody. So in the example of working with Anushka, my act of composing the clarinet sonata was not collaborative, except for in the instances where I had to ask her very specific questions about the instrument and about what she preferred. But we collaborated very, very much on the process of, you know, bringing the piece to its performance. And also we did a recording project, which I actually didn't physically attend, but I did over Zoom. And so that, of course, was very much collaborative. So I just want to say that because the way that I'm saying it here is missing a pretty big element. With this particular flute concerto, which I didn't wind up calling it that because it was only about 12 minutes long, and I don't know, I have preconceived notions in my head about what a concerto is. But in any case, when it came to this Rhapsody, this flute and orchestra piece, I wanted to make an effort, especially since I lived with the soloist, to genuinely make that a collaborative effort. And again, I don't think that one way is better than the other. It's just that I really seldom get to experience the way that I did this. And what that largely consisted of was like playing around with musical ideas and kind of improvising and brainstorming about the form and what different sections the piece could have and what different ideas we wanted to do, if we wanted to have a cadenza. And the cadenza wound up being mostly Claire's improvisation. So that's sort of what I mean by that, is like the performer came up with a lot of the musical material, which I think is awesome. I think that's really cool, and that makes that piece personal to Claire. I mean, I don't know, I can't speak to how she feels about it, but I had written for her before, and it was that experience of like, okay, let me do my thing. I'm just gonna do what I do, and you're gonna have a flute sonata. And that was in 2019. And again, I don't think that one is better than the other. I just wanted to try something new, and I think that accomplished that. And so that premiered on April 1st, 2024. So that was kind of the first thing I was working on that school year. Again, I'm not really going to talk about school. The main thing I was getting out of school was studying conducting, and that was the positive force in my education at that point. I don't really care to talk about anything else. So I finished the Rhapsody, and like I mentioned before, Nat 28 had their call for scores out, and I talked about this piece a little bit already. It's a Perot piece called Shadyside Loops. Shadyside was the neighborhood I lived in, and it's about a overcast morning I experienced when I just walked. I basically did laps around my neighborhood, and I don't know how many I did, but I did several. And I had this terrible like coffee protein thing that I got from Rite Aid, which is now bankrupt and out of business as far as I know. Just a sort of obsessive and kind of, I don't want to say like dismal, but it's a very gray piece. I wish I could express that more relatably, I guess. I'm not very good at talking about my music, obviously. However, yeah, like I said before, I wound up being one of the winners of their call for scores, and that was a really cool experience, really great to work with them. That premiered, I want to say, March 2024. Went for kind of a more minimalist thing there. Oh, I got, I think, COVID, but I'm not sure, in September, and I was supposed to run the Pittsburgh Great Race, which is well, I think it's multiple races, but I was gonna do the, like, 10K, and I got sick literally like the evening before the race, and so that was a bummer, because moving to Pittsburgh, I got really into running. I think I said that, I don't remember. And so that was going to be kind of the culmination of that, but it never wound up materializing, and it was like $70 down the drain or something like that, which, yeah, that was a bummer. But anyway, I got sick, and then I spent the next day, a couple hours of it at least, writing this little flute duo called Head Empty, which is just a brain fog piece. It's also kind of minimalist, built on like quintal harmony, quintal and quartal. Hate that word because it sounds like you're saying quartal harmony. Yeah, so that's a cute little thing that has not been recorded. And then the following semester, it was the last semester of my master's degree, so I was working a bit on the clarinet sonata, and I also had these viola duos. Oh, by the way, okay, so I don't want to overshare about my mental health stuff. As I said, it was a tough year, but I did start dating my partner, Ariana, who's a violist. You have to forgive me if I'm repeating myself. I don't think I am, though, but it's been 6 months since I made the first part of this video. And that was that had a very positive impact on my mental health. Not that I think that your partner should solve your mental health problems, and that's not what happened, and that's not how that works, but it did help contributing factors, such as like my social situation. Like I was able to become better friends with more of the strings folks, and that was really nice. And so I wrote these preludes, these viola duos, because I was like, there really are not a lot of these. And so we played, I wrote 4 of them, and I intended to write 12, and kind of TBD on if I will ever write all 12 of those, kind of like my endless piano preludes that I started in really 2017, and I only have 4. That's yeah, it's one of those. But anyway, we played the first 4, or the only 4 that I've written, on her master's recital, and that was fun to write those. But yeah, so I had the Rhapsody for flute and chamber orchestra. I had Head Empty for 2 flutes. I had Shady Side Loops for Perot ensemble. The 4 out of 12 preludes for 2 violas, and then the clarinet sonata was sort of the last thing I did. I didn't finish that until the summer of 2024. The other thing that dominated this year for me personally was that I was preparing auditions to go back to the University of Colorado. I had several meetings about this, and I worked with the graduate advisor there, who was just a fantastic human being and just extremely helpful. And my plan was to do a dual master's degree in conducting and viola, because what I found at Carnegie Mellon was that studying conducting was doing a lot more for me as a person and as a musician than studying composition. I was like, okay, I know I'm going to be a composer forever, no matter what, but I think in terms of my studies, I need to move it away from that. And I don't have a master's in conducting, so I would have to do sort of a lateral move, and wind up with 3 master's degrees. Basically was going to be the thing. It was going to be a 3-year plan, and I met with a bunch of different people at University of Colorado, and I spent a lot of my fall semester recording conducting auditions, which I did wind up actually posting on this channel. It was the Joseph Bologna, or Bologna, I don't ever remember how to say that right, Symphony No. 1, and then the George Walker lyric for strings. And I basically hired a bunch of Carnegie Mellon musicians, and we got those recordings done in a day. We rehearsed and recorded within like a 4-hour period. And then I had to do viola auditions, so that meant like learning viola repertoire, which I was not in viola lessons basically until I started this process at Carnegie Mellon. I mean, I majored in viola at CU, so I had not been in viola lessons for a while. So I was learning Walton viola concerto, which is one of the big three. If you don't know the viola rep, which I don't know who's watching this. I don't know why they would know the viola rep, but anyway, the Walton is one of the big three viola concerti. And then I was learning the Shostakovich Sonata, which is the last piece he wrote, by the way, really great piece. And then Bach, third cello suite. And so that took a lot of time and effort. And while I was doing it, I was like, you know what the hell, let's just record for Aspen and Brevard and these other things as well. So I was learning excerpts as well and recording those. So my first semester was dominated by like audition stress. And then I had live auditions in, I want to say in February for my viola one and March. So I was flying out to Colorado 2 different times. Those went really well. I got into the program. The graduate advisor there was basically building so that I could do this 3-year thing for 2 master's degrees. What wound up happening was my conducting teacher at Carnegie Mellon, Daniel Curtis, he basically let me know that the following school year they were going to need an assistant conductor. And so it just wound up being a thing of like, what is going to give me more hands-on experience. And I still would have loved to study at CU, and I was not able to keep the financial package that they had awarded me if I were to defer 1 year, obviously, because those are like TA-ships that need to go to people. I wound up choosing to be Maestro Curtis's assistant, and so that meant that for the next year I was going to be the assistant conductor of the Carnegie Mellon Philharmonic. I think it wound up being the better choice because I think by virtue of Carnegie Mellon having a smaller music school, it just afforded me more opportunities. And that is not to say anything negative about CU Boulder. I had a wonderful time there for my undergrad, and I think that the people there are wonderful, and this is not to say anything negative about that. It just happened to be like, it just was what happened to be the better option at the time. And I think, if it were any other type of situation, like, there's going to be a conducting program at Carnegie Mellon now, and there's going to be 6 or 7 students, that would have been very different. It was very much the fact that like I was going to be the only one in this position and have a lot of responsibilities that sort of pushed me in that direction. So I think a lot of it was just being like in the right place at the right time. Yeah, as much as I love CU Boulder and I love the people at CU Boulder, I think that the opportunities I would have had there would have been fewer, or not fewer, but I would have had to have worked more to make those opportunities for myself, which is perfectly fine, and I think I'm capable of doing that sort of thing, but I basically would have been a smaller fish in a bigger pond, and I think at that moment I wanted to stay put and kind of see what happened. That is essentially the gist of that year, and with this new assistant conductor position and opportunity, there were a lot of exciting things that I had to start working on basically that summer, and so that is what we will talk about next in a different location. Okay, so segueing into the third and final year of my being in Pittsburgh, 2024 to 2025, that was my year serving as assistant conductor of the Carnegie Mellon Philharmonic, and with that, the major opportunities were being the conductor of the contemporary ensemble in the spring semester and getting to conduct the Philharmonic, obviously, in rehearsals, sectionals, and in one instance, a performance of Carter Pan's Slalom, which was really cool because I studied with Carter Pan, and so that was just really fun to really get to dig into his music in that way. But a lot of the work
involved just learning so many scores. And so that was for contemporary ensemble, that was for the Philharmonic. I learned all of the music that the Philharmonic did, even though in the vast majority of instances I wasn't ever like conducting any of it. But basically, if something had happened to Maestro Curtis to where he couldn't make the concert, I was like the first in line. So I had to know all of the music. And then also the rep orchestra was not only still part of my experience at Carnegie Mellon, but it was actually, there were far more rep orchestra sessions than there were in either of the 2 previous years. We did 8 sessions instead of the usual 4. And I think I conducted on all but 1 or 2 of those. And that's 8 per semester, not per year. So I guess there were 16 total. So I was still very much composing in this year. It directly related to my work with the contemporary ensemble. So I was writing my chamber symphony for that group. And the previous year, I had studied the Schoenberg chamber symphony, and that is for 15 musicians. And I wanted to have the same amount. I wanted it to be for the same number of musicians. And so I scored it very differently because conducting and balancing that piece is kind of a nightmare. So what I did instead was a string nonette, so like a standard octet plus a bass, and then a woodwind quintet with tenor sax instead of the horn. I started work on that in the summer before the school year started, and Maestro Curtis wanted me to involve a singer, particularly a fellow student, Wallace Lucas. She's a soprano, and this was like sort of a major deal for me because I have never written for voice, and I feel so comfortable writing for most instruments. I feel really comfortable writing for orchestra. With the voice, it is just the complete opposite. There are additional dimensions to consider, particularly like choosing text. That was one of the most difficult parts of this experience, was that I don't personally really relate to a lot of poetry. I find it very difficult for me to like get something out of a lot of the time, and especially the English language I think can sound so strange when it is sung in like a classical sort of setting. And this is just a completely personal thing. Like I know there are plenty of people who don't feel that way at all about English or about text. It's just my own challenges with it. I don't want to say that it was the most difficult piece for me to write, because I don't think that is the case, but it was definitely up there. And the result of it wound up being probably in my top 3 or 5 favorite pieces that I've written, which is very I know that comes off really like narcissistic, but I try to assess the work that I do on a scale of how much I actually would want to listen to it. And this was one of the instances where I did a good job for myself. So what I wound up making that, and I can go more in depth with this later, because one of the things I'd like to do in the future with this channel is make a video about each of my pieces and basically have very detailed and extensive program notes, but in video form. I think that would be a fun addition to this channel. Basically, I thought about the vocal music that I really like. 99% of it is Mahler, and this is, going back to Mahler 4. That symphony is instrumental for 3 out of its 4 movements. And in the 4th movement, it has the singer. I thought, you know what, that could be a really cool model to sort of adapt for what I'm doing. And so I made movements 1 and 3 instrumental, and movements 2 and 4 with Wallace. And so I think that wound up working really, really well. But that basically dominated my first semester, in addition to preparing slalom. Yeah, so keeping up with preparing that and writing the chamber symphony and doing rep orchestra, that all was a lot. And I was still in viola lessons with David Harding. Yeah, It was really stressful, but I think my mental health was actually really, really improved from the previous 2 years. Yeah, it was the good kind of stress where it's like stress about art and academic stuff, which, I mean, that can sometimes be the bad kind of stress, but in this instance, it was good. And then at the beginning of the second semester, in January, on January 25th of this year, we premiered the Chamber Symphony. I think it went really, really well. And then I had a whole rest of that program to learn and rehearse for 2 weeks with that group. And so that was, I actually have the poster of it up here. So we started with Starburst, Jesse Montgomery. That's a very famous new piece from, I think, 2012. Yoshimatsu, White Landscapes. That was really, really fun to get to do. I was really, really happy to get to do Yoshimatsu, and White Landscapes is a really, really beautiful piece that there are several recordings of on YouTube, so I would definitely go check those out if you're not familiar. And if you're not familiar with Yoshimatsu, the Fifth Symphony and the Piano Concerto, and he's got a string piece called And Birds Are Still. Those are probably my top 3 of his pieces, but all the symphonies are good. He's got a bunch of concerti. Anyway, check him out. Paul Trapkis, Trio for 3 Violas. That was the 3rd piece on the program, and that is originally a trio for 3 violins, and he was my high school orchestra teacher. So he was the first person to like teach me composition. He also taught me violin and viola, and so that was really special to get to arrange his piece. I did not play in that. I sort of originally intended to, but I think my stress level was too high. So yeah, we had 3 great violists play that. And then my 2 pieces finished that program. One of them was the Chamber Symphony, obviously. That was the last piece. And then I have a string piece called 3 Coloradan Snowscapes that I wrote originally for Pro Musica Colorado Chamber Orchestra, which is no longer. That group does not exist anymore. And I wrote that in 2020. Got to sort of rework it with this group. So that was sort of the highlight of the year, I think. And yeah, a ton of work went into that. And then as far as composing goes, I have to remember what I did. I wrote my second sax quartet for Kodachrome, who are a phenomenal group out of Arizona. And yeah, they've premiered it. I haven't been to any of the premieres, but they've sent me recordings of them, and it's just, yeah, they're phenomenal. I actually don't know what I should and shouldn't speak about here, but basically there's a project in the works to make it so that piece can be heard, and I'm really, really excited for that. But yeah, I was working on that kind of also in the winter, and then I guess I kind of had to take a break from composing in the spring. I had a commission on the docket for my friend Ame, who was the violist in the Avalis quartet, and they're the quartet that recorded my 3rd string quartet, and that's on this channel. She's the violist on that recording, and she's phenomenal, and I had that commission on the docket, and I think I was just too stressed out, so I had to push that. And now I've actually, it's November, and I've just finished that like a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago. Oh, and then the final thing that I wrote that year was a band piece actually for my middle school and my middle school band teacher. Very tragically, one of her students passed away, and he was actually the brother of one of my close friends in high school. And I didn't know him very well personally. I had met him a few times when he was like in kindergarten, but yeah, he passed away in early 2024. And so I wrote a piece for the group that he was in at that middle school, basically in his memory. So that was also really special to work on. But yeah, I would say that this last school year of 2024 to 2025, where I got to be the assistant conductor and the conductor of the contemporary ensemble, that was by far my most fulfilling year at Carnegie Mellon. There are so many people that I owe that to. Obviously, Daniel Curtis, my partner, Ariana, our roommate, Evan, who is a violinist. He was the first violin on the Chamber Symphony. And he was just great to be around. You know, your roommates have a big impact on your mental health. And it was great to live with Evan and Ariana that year. And yeah, just I don't know, I it's like I finally had friends that year, and that made a big difference. Imagine that. Working with Wallace was great on the chamber symphony. I also worked with one of the composition faculty, Dr. Kate Pakinskis, on the chamber symphony, and particularly on like writing for the voice. And that was, I wouldn't have been able to write this piece without that help. I also sat in on Wallace's lessons with Jennifer Aylmer, which was really cool. Yeah, I don't know. There are just so many people that I owe that positive experience to, and so it's nice that my experience in Pittsburgh ended in a really positive way. And it's funny to sort of look back on the beginning section of this video that I recorded in May, right before I left, and I remember feeling so strongly that like I was so sad to leave, which is the exact opposite of how I felt my first 2 years in Pittsburgh. I spent the summer of 2023 in Colorado, and the end of that summer I so badly didn't want to leave. So it's sort of bittersweet, and I now have 6 months of distance from leaving Pittsburgh, and so I'm not in that really nostalgic headspace anymore. But I'm just really glad that it ended up that way. And so that brings us to now, which, you know, I fully expect that nobody's watching this. It's more for me and for the 3 people that watch all the way to this point. But I have to say, it is very strange to have basically double the amount of subscribers that I did the last time I made a video where I actually spoke to my audience. That is a very strange feeling, and I feel guilt about that it has been this long since I've like communicated and done anything for this channel other than uploading my own pieces and Carter's pieces. Yeah, I think the latter 2 years in Pittsburgh, it was just really, my experience with YouTube was pretty deflating, and I was also so busy that it was like I just couldn't make it a priority at that time. I'm now in a place where I would like to return to it in a way that feels right. A lot of the videos that I made at the beginning of my time in Pittsburgh, I think they were well thought out, and a lot of them I think were well made, but they didn't feel right. And I don't know how to put it other than that. I think a big part of that is due to like things being scripted. None of this is scripted, by the way, obviously, but it makes it very difficult to film and edit when I do things that aren't scripted, because I take a lot of pauses and I don't always know what I'm talking about. But I think genuinely in a lot of instances that is actually better than sort of pretending that I'm Thomas Goss or whoever. Not that I'm pretending that I am, but the way I speak like kind of code switches to those types of people who are these like big authorities, and they make these really well made, really well produced YouTube videos. And I've spent more time trying to be that type of person than like trying to figure out what actually feels good for me to make. So yeah, that's not to say that I'm not going to have any kind of scripted videos in the future, because that would be a complete disaster. But I do want to make more videos like this that are not as long, but more personal videos that are just about what I'm doing. And like I said before, videos about my pieces. I also want to stream. I want to stream composing. I want to stream playing music. I actually created a separate channel for that. I can link that in the description. Again, I don't expect that anybody's watching this, but I will have that linked in the description if anybody wants to see that. There's nothing on that channel, but I made it so that I can stream, you know, practicing violin and viola and piano whenever. And yeah, I've been teaching a little bit too. I think some of these things are things that I'll make shorter videos about that are more focused. But yeah, I've been teaching. I'm going to open it up to anybody who wants to take composition lessons with me over Zoom. I'm going to make a specific video about that. I've been doing editing and arranging type work as well. Yeah, just a lot of different stuff, trying to get my pieces in shape that were engraved maybe 5 or 6 years ago and making those look nicer. But yeah, I have quite a few different video ideas in mind, and then also returning to the more tutorial type stuff like string writing videos, or maybe orchestration stuff, but I feel like I've kind of exhausted a lot of my energy for that sort of thing, at least the orchestration minutes. We'll see, but definitely score analysis and how to write for certain instruments. Yeah, all that is to say that I'm returning to this channel, and I'm trying to do it in a way that feels right. And for me, that meant making a gigantic video of me yapping about the last 3 years, and so that's where we are right now. If you have watched this, thank you. I don't know who this isn't, like, for anybody in particular. It's mostly for me, and I think I said that at the beginning, but I do really appreciate anybody who watched. And if anybody wants to share their own experiences that are similar to anything that I've shared here, please feel free to. Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks very much for watching.